Hi guys, thank you for tuning in to G&G Live Show. I just want to take a moment to just say how grateful and I am for everybody that showed me so much love in the last 2 days for the nominations that I got. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. I was as surprised, and I don't even care to win. It was just an honor to be even nominated. So thank you so much. Today we have a special segment, and it's going to be my friend, my co-host, Gil, the expert on the subject matter, and he's pretty much going to run the show today. Gil, it's all yours.
Hey, awesome. First of all, congratulations, Gurpreet. Well earned. You know what I think of the work you do and what you bring to the community. And I mean, one of the things that drew me to your posts before we ever had actually met was your leadership and your passion for helping. And so I hope you win. I know it's old. Yeah, I'm just honored to be nominated. Blah,
no,
blah, blah.
honestly,
I get that. I understand that. And I'm not questioning that. And I'm not saying you're not being genuine about that. I'm saying I hope you win. That's what I'm saying.
It'd be nice. I've never won.
It'll be nice.
I've never been recognized or nominated or won any award. If I do, that's what I was saying. It's just I've been on cloud 9 ever since this whole week, just because I've never been nominated. That's why I was saying, like, it's just an honor to be nominated. Yes, if I win, I'll probably cry. I'll probably be crying.
Yes, and I will be celebrating and doing a little dance. I'll be honest with you, because I'll be quite excited for you.
It's all your show today. So if anybody doesn't know, please follow Gil. If you haven't been following, he's been posting a couple of series today. I mean, not today, the past few days and past week. And that's why we thought it was important for him to lead today's segment in line with what he's been posting. So I'm going to let Gil run the show today. It's all you, Gil.
Awesome. Thank you. So the series that I've been posting on is about behavioral competencies. But I want to rewind a little bit and talk about behaviors, because behaviors are really, they're at the heart of the work that I've done my entire career. This is why, because as you know, I've worked for my dad for pretty much the first 16 years of my career. He was an established consultant, and that was really what differentiated his work was around behaviors and understanding that at the end of the day, that's really what differentiates performance is the behaviors we come with. Skills and knowledge, aside from certain things, skills and knowledge can be taught.
Yes.
Skills and knowledge are things that we can be trained on. Whereas behavior and behavioral change is a lot harder to come by.
Yep.
But the reality is, if you ask anybody, if you really get to the heart of it, why did you leave the last job? It will come down to somebody's behavior. Why was that person great at their role? It will come down to their behavior. I'll use a great example, which is the mentor that you often talk about. Your mentor who helped you grow into the professional that you are.
Yes.
But that wasn't about what he knew. It wasn't about, his mindset or his perspective. It was ultimately about his behaviors. Do I invite Gurpreet into this meeting or not? When she tells me an idea that I may not think is a good idea, how do I respond to it? Do I squash her ideas or do I encourage her? All of this came down to his behaviors.
Yes.
And that is why, for me, one of the things that always engaged me with it is the fact that, if you're a fly on the wall watching a situation, you don't know a thought that's going into a person's head. You don't know what's going through a person's brain, but you see how they're acting, whether it be body language, whether it be tone, whether it be the content of their communication, whatever it might be, you can see the way they're acting. And
you can sense it too. You can feel it. It's I think it's just more than seeing. You can feel it. You can just feel it.
Well, it's a funny thing. I was told a long time ago, when on the phone, smile. when you're on the telephone.
You can feel
because
it.
like you said, people can feel it.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's, I was young when I was told it, so I rolled my eyes, but I still tried it anyway and have learned to, appreciate the power that it does have. But exactly, you can feel it. But it's the impact that you have on others that ultimately determines your relationships and determines the way other people present themselves with you.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that I always found engaging about it is that the articulating behaviors does a variety of things. So now bringing it back to competencies, bringing it back to behavioral competencies. Articulating behavioral competencies brings a few items to the business, to the people aspect of the business. And one of the things it does is it sets clarity and expectations. So one of the activities that I've done many times is helping organizations articulate their values. And a lot of companies have articulated values really, really badly. Because the problem is that there's very little differentiation from one company to another. I've asked at conferences before, how many people have respect as a value? 75% of the room raises their hand. How many people have honesty as a value? 75% of the room raises their hand.
Everyone has this.
Everyone has the same values. However, the reality is that that's not actually true, because you've worked with enough companies to know that what flies at one company doesn't necessarily fly at another company. A behavior that is success at one company can get you fired at another company.
Yeah. Recently, it's funny you said that. This individual's popping in my head, and she was telling me this. She went to this organization, and the culture was so different, and it was toxic, but it was so different to the point where she's used to speaking her mind, giving tips and advice. Oh, hey, why don't we try this? And she's a go-getter and a person who takes initiative. So she told her boss, manager, a few ideas. Why aren't we doing this? We should look at doing this, and so on. Smiled, or whatever the case was, the boss said. 2 weeks later, that boss wrote her up saying that your behavior is not appropriate. Your attitude.
And that is the company demonstrating its value. The example I always like to use is the one around respect. Respect to one manager would be that when the manager comes to you and brings a bad idea to you, that you respect them enough because you have a relationship, you let them know, okay, I don't necessarily think that that's the best idea, and here's why, or here's an alternative. That is the demonstration of respect in some organizations. That's the kind of organization I'd want to work for. Yeah. Where if I were to present somebody a bad idea, that they respect me enough to say, you know what, his ego can take it. I'm going to tell him where I think he missed the boat. And I'd want that to happen. Whereas respect in another organization, and it sounds like your friend works in that type of organization,
She quit.
Oh, she left. She did work in that type of organization.
Yeah, she could see you then. Like, if this is how it's going to be, then what's the point, right? That's how you lose talent.
That is how you lose talent. And that ties into the whole employee experience and retention. And that's a whole other topic I could get into for a while. But the reality is, respect in some places is, my boss told me a bad idea, but they're the boss and I respect them by doing what they tell me without questioning them. That's what respect means. Two totally different behaviors, opposite behaviors. And so the problem with organizations is that they articulate these values as these lofty ideas, but they're left to subjectivity. And that's one of the things that I love about behaviors, is that it reduces subjectivity. Mm-hmm. We're all human. We all have our cognitive biases. Yeah. We all have our perceptions. But if you're able to make sure everybody around the table understands exactly what a behavior looks like, then everybody can understand whether or not the behavior is actually being lived. True. And so behaviors need to be written in a way and articulated in a way that it's clarity. It's not about, oh, well, it's left open to interpretation. Maybe they thought about doing that. It's behaviors, the way you measure behaviors is frequency relative to opportunity. That's how you measure whether or not a behavior, because the problem with a lot of times when a person analyzes a behavior is, oh, they did that the other week. Okay, I'll give them great marks on it. But that doesn't necessarily take into account that there were 10 other opportunities that they didn't do it. So they don't necessarily deserve the high marks on it. So that is sort of my soapbox version of why behaviors matter. So then behavioral competencies, are sort of the next step after values behaviors. Values behaviors are those core ideas that everybody is expected to live up to. These are the things that the common wording is values. You don't even have to call them that. You can call it a code of conduct. One of the most successful initiatives I worked with at the company implementing them didn't call them values at all. They called them keys to success.
Oh, that's nice. That's actually better wording.
I liked it a lot because it doesn't make it that it has to be emotional. It doesn't make it that, it has to be all encompassing, or what does it mean if that word is missing? But it's just saying, here at our company, these are the keys to success. Whether you're the CEO, whether you just started today, we don't care. We all have to live those behaviors.
I love it. I really, really like it.
Yeah, and because I find values, and I've been working with them for years, the word can turn people off. The word can shake people, or when articulating values, when with leadership teams, they start to say, well, what does it mean if we don't say this in our values, or we don't say that? Well, at a certain point, you have to make decisions, and you can't have a long list.
Yeah, but even that code of conduct, that, when now you heard about another company that calls a key to success, and I was like, oh yeah, I like that. I love it, because code of conduct is also kind of scary. When you start,
well, it's also an expectation of management versus employees.
Yeah, and it also
kind of thing.
Kind of intimidating too, and it can be scary in the sense of, oh my God, if I don't follow the code of conduct, I can get fired, right? The mental state of one reading it. But when you said key to success, automatically that's again, the feeling, the inspiration is oh, this is how I can be successful. I love it. I actually love it.
I agree. It's pointing toward a positive direction instead of away from a negative. That kind of thing. So in that's sort of my point around it is, it's all about these unifying behaviors that everybody is expected to do universally. Universally. Yeah, no, it's a really cool idea. I wish I could say it was mine. It wasn't. but in that company used it really well. And so the way they used it was actually around acquisitions. They were a company that they grew 20 to 30% year over year purely from acquisition. And they were able to find companies that they were able to bring under the fold easily, because they found companies that believed in the same keys to success. Okay. And so that's where you need to start, is the universal within the organization. Then within each role, there's going to be differences. How an executive behaves versus how a frontline staff member behaves versus how a middle manager behaves. There's different requirements. There's different role requirements. Even within different functions, there's going to be different role requirements. And so behavioral competencies are, again, about pointing people in the successful direction. So what the process starts with data collection. The process starts with talking to the people who are already in the role. I'll tell you right now, off-the-shelf competencies do not work. They just don't work, because aside from the fact that they're not written in the company's language, they're not unique to the organization, and it's one of those things where employees feel like, oh, this is another thing that's done at us. They're just they're telling us how to behave. Whereas if you collect the information from people who are already being successful in the role, then they actually push it, and they're actually out front about it, saying, hey, look at these behavioral competencies. Let's hire toward these. Let's promote toward these, because we know they work. We know they work. So it starts out with talking to people. And I don't know if you saw my video yesterday, but this is a bit of an aside. I put out a video on LinkedIn yesterday talking about how.
I'll watch it, but no, I didn't get a chance yet.
This is the section, the data collection, that really drove my passion around employee experience. Because what would happen was I'd sit in focus groups for hours with employee groups, frontline staff, supervisors, middle managers, all the way on. And they would tell me, this is the good, and but they'd also tell me this is the bad. And they'd tell me things they didn't trust HR to tell them. They didn't trust their manager to tell them, but these were things that were happening in the organization. And it was how leaders were basically driving them nuts and limiting them from being successful. So it was in those that I really was like, okay, something needs to be done about how leaders lead, how they build organizations. But that's for another day.
I want to interject here for a second. You said something about, forgot the wording you used, but a lot of companies copy paste. They see values from other companies or code of conduct and copy paste. And also, we talked about this many times, the trend and the buzzwords. So the company start adopting the buzz and the trends. Oh, this company's doing this, let me copy. I always say, every company I worked in and any client we've worked with in my company, we always say you got to walk the talk. And if the way you are exhibiting internally, then, and if it's different from what you're projecting on your website to be the values and stuff, or your code of conduct and so on, then you need to change, right? And I love what you said, like collect data and then and develop your let's go with the key of success. And I really like that word, that phrase versus code of conduct and policies, or how someone should behave at their company. I think a lot of people are not really paying attention to what's really happening in the organization and then developing things. But a lot of people are just copying and pasting. And I like what you said, collect data, like do focus group or however you want to collect data, but like at least first get the data.
Well, see, that's the thing. When it comes to values, the data needs to come from leadership. That's the thing about values, and I mean that's a whole topic for another time. But I want to key in on what you said about walk the talk. So in all of these countless focus groups I've run, every single time at the end of them, I always ask them advice to me as the consultant of how to make sure this is a success. And I always ask them, what's your advice to leadership? Pretty much 100 times out of 100, at least one person will say walk the talk as the recommendation. So pretty much every focus, and usually more than one person, but pretty much every focus group I've ever been in, somebody has made that recommendation to leadership because it's so vital, which is exactly why when articulating the values, when you rewind and actually start putting it down on paper, you can only put things that are actually authentic.
Yeah.
I'll get to what that said in a second, but values need to be authentic, because if they're actually values, they don't change. They might slowly evolve. They're not situational. Values are the way you test values. A genuine value, as opposed to an idea or a belief or something you like, is a value is something that if you were 1,000 miles from home, nobody had cell phones, nobody had cameras, and you were tested with something that you always thought was a value, and you have the opportunity to break it with nobody else knowing, you have freedom to do it. If you break it, it wasn't a value. Yeah. You were just trying to present yourself a certain way. Whereas if it doesn't matter, somebody finds out or not, if you're alone in the world and nobody could find out and you still behave a certain way, That's your values. And that is why leaders need to be the ones to articulate values that actually align with how they're going to behave. So going back to what you were saying, they cut and paste, terrible idea. Another way they do it is they come up with what they think it should be or what would present well. Well, we have to have customer as part of our value. Well, we're a for-profit company, we're a corporation, so we should have profit as part of it. They decide not based on how they actually make decisions, based on how they think they should be making decisions or how it would look publicly. But the reality is that's not how values work. And you can try and you can present it a certain way as much as you want to make them aspirational, but the employees know. And so exactly to what you're talking about, how you can put them on the website, but if you live differently, that's the difference between covert and overt values. So the overt values are the ones that you put on the wall, you put on the business card, the one you say you believe in. But when it actually comes time to making a decision, you say your value is caring for people, but at the beginning of COVID, you fired a third of everyone to save your salary. Which is it? It's not, it can't be both. And so values are something that needs to be the core. Again, like I say, you don't have to call them values. You can call them keys to success. You can call them whatever is meaningful to your organization, but something that ties everybody together around this is how we all should expect each other to behave, because that consistency moves towards psychological safety. Because if you want people to be productive, you want people to be happy at work, you want people to be retained, then they need to know what to expect. They need to know that, if my boss says they're going to behave a certain way, they're actually going to behave that way.
Correct. So I know we only have like 7 minutes. So I'm like kind of looking.
Well, you got me started. That's the whole thing. I blame you. You get me started. I can't stop.
But this ties into everything where we've been doing this for a year. We've been talking about all this, right? Why it matters and what companies are doing versus what they should be doing. They say one thing and they do another thing, right? So this goes into the second piece that you wanted to talk about was, what's the best practices on building this?
Yes. So the best practice, as I started before, was collect from the source. Collect from people in the role, because they may not realize it, and it takes a certain nuance to draw it out of them. But they know the behaviors that they've been living. And also asking the people around them, right? Because if they're a manager, asking their direct reports. Because a manager may think a behavior brought out success, and you might find out from their direct reports it was a completely different story, right? They might have been scrambling behind the scenes to hide things from the manager or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So once you've collected that, breaking it down into the behaviors, looking for the situations, behaviors, and outcomes. And so understanding that it can't just be any behavior. There needs to be tied to outcomes. You need to understand, okay, so because a person did X, the outcome was Y. From there, once you've decoded all that information, you'll have a large list of behaviors. The reality is from what I found, anything over 30, 35 is essentially going to become overwhelming, because you're not looking at all of the behaviors at once anyway. But the reality is, especially if you've got a list of values behaviors or keys to success behaviors that you're already focusing on, and on top of that, you've got behavioral competencies, you don't want people having, 100 behavior lists and say, hey, pick and choose. So to get it down from the list, from the data collection, what I do is validate. Sending out a validation email with the full list of behaviors and asking people to determine which are the ones that are really success behaviors, which are the ones that are less important. Because then you can determine the most important 30 or 35 behaviors for that role. Because it's all about how does that role need to be acting in order for it to be successful. And then once you have the behavioral profile, and I'm going to be talking about this on LinkedIn more next week is, what are some applications for behaviors? What are some ways then, so you've got this amazing values profile, you've got this amazing behavioral competency profile, now what? And so there are a whole variety of talent management activities that can be done from these behavioral competencies. So one of the things I really enjoyed last week, I got to participate with my dad actually in training people on behavioral interviewing, because behavioral interviewing is a really, really great way of collecting relevant data to determine if a person's going to be successful in a role. And I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but the numbers show that traditional interviews only give you, at best, a coin toss in whether or not a person's going to be successful in a role, whereas behaviors, a good structured behavioral interview will give you more data to determine whether or not they'll be able to be successful and be able to hit the ground running. Other ways I've also worked with, as I mentioned, values. Values should be behavioralized, because that way they're real. That way they're less subjective and people understand what it actually means. I've used them for performance management, helping people understand. So if these are the behaviors of success, helping them, and I've written behavioral guides, development guides to help develop each of the behaviors, because this has helped organizations improve the workforce, because if they know, okay, these are the behaviors I have to work towards, these are the success behaviors, that's what they end up learning and then improving on the job. Succession planning, I've worked with organizations who put together leadership profiles, because this helps them really identify who are the high potentials, who are the ones that are getting success within their role, but also meet the requirements for the future roles. Because that counters the whole problem that a lot of people are promoted because of how good they are in their role, not how good they might be in future roles. Whereas if you have a behavioral profile and you say, hey, look, leadership behaviors are these behaviors, and the person's already living them, even though that's not part of their role, that's showing that they have the potential at the next level.
Yeah.
As opposed to somebody who's doing all the great individual behaviors, getting all the results, but show no leadership competencies.
This is the key, right? A lot of everything you're saying, I was going to say, one of the things that a lot of companies are missing the mark, regardless of what size your organization is developing these profiles for each role. Who is I call them candidate profiles, and it covers all layers. But you have to develop a candidate profile for each role in your organization. Yes, you'll be changing and so on. But if an individual is not fitting that profile, everything you're saying, behavior, the key for someone to be successful in the role, it needs to be identified. And I found a lot of companies just go into just putting a job description, but not really thinking, well, who will be successful in this role? It's not about, let me just go pick up anybody and hire anybody, but you need to also do your due diligence. It's the onus of the company, if you're going to hire someone, to set them up for success. And then I love what you're saying, like the behavior. And then we did a segment with your dad, which I loved, the whole value aspect. How many people are not even hiring based on values? Behavior, and I love what you said in there early in the beginning, was, you can train people on everything except for behavior, which goes right into what values. You can't change people's values. I don't care what anybody says, right? I'm 41. Okay. I have recognized the last 6 months of doing my own development on my personal development, and I've seen a lot of my patterns. You know how hard it is to change your behavior?
Only a significant emotional event. That's what's going to change your values. Short of that, they might slowly evolve, but a significant emotional event, something really foundational. And I'm not saying it did, but something like when your father passed away, a significant emotional event that has the potential to change things. It's not necessarily automatically going to. Otherwise, most companies aren't living through significant emotional events every day. These things aren't changing dramatically. A role profile, like you pointed out, that's going to ebb and flow. You're going to need to look back on those. And you make a great point that, when a person comes on, you want to determine what are the skills, the knowledge, and the key behaviors that they need to bring on? What are the behaviors once they're on board? What do they need to make sure they're targeting? That's how we assess performance. We're just now out of time. But I'll see you again in a couple of hours.
You know what? I was going to say, this is actually tying. So while you're talking, I already had the ending piece covered to say, hey, this conversation is going to be continued tonight at 7, because this actually does tie in where we got invited. So Gil and myself got invited to be guest speaker on the panel with other great guest speakers on Jen's Live. And we're talking about, are you afraid to rock the boat? And this kind of like goes right into what we're going to discuss tonight on, how many people are scared to rock the boat. But everything you're saying it's like, we know it, but how many people don't understand the importance of how this is so important piece, even when you're hiring, because the key is to retain talent. I think anyone can attract talent to their organization. Unless your views are really bad on Glassdoor, then you can't. But you should be able to attract talent. But I think a lot of companies struggle with retention. If you can retain, of course, then you can't attract either, because you're going to have bad Glassdoor reviews. But just that piece of everything you said, not identifying, first of all, what are your actual values that you stand for, not what all the other companies think they stand for, but what do you stand for, what you want your organization to be, and people coming into your organization, what do you want them to have? And the last piece is characteristics, behaviors, all that stuff matter. And it's a piece that I've found that a lot of hiring managers, even companies, when they're hiring, miss out the mark, and then they just hire, but then that fit's not happening because you didn't do this due diligence.
It cut and pasted the job description too, but that's a difference.
Yes. How many?
I don't want to get you started.
So much. This we never have enough time when we're talking, because there's just so many layers. If anybody wants to continue this discussion, please follow Gill. I think you're at. I saw third post on this today. Part 3.
I was on the
Is it 6 series?
So I'm doing 5 posts this week on best practices around building the competencies. Okay. And then I'll do 5 posts next week on behavioral applications. So I'm going to talk a bit on why values need a behavioral application. I'll talk about behavioral interviewing, different ones next week.
Okay, so guys, this discussion is going to be continued. It is already continued on to Gil's post. If you're not following him, please follow him with all with this post and all the other content that he puts out every day on LinkedIn. I've learned a lot in the last year just having Gil as my co-host and reading his post. I don't think anyone can ever know enough, and it's nice to have surround yourself with individuals that have expertise in different areas than you do, and that's how we can all grow and create better workplaces. You
and I have tried to do right with each other, trying to just learn from each other, which I think has benefited us both significantly. So I look forward to our call later.
Yes, and we will both be live today on Jen's Live, Sales with the Heart Leadership. That's her LinkedIn Live show. We've been invited to speak, and both of us, including other individuals, will be on the panel. So please tune in to that as well tonight at 7 p.m. So we'll see you at 7. Bye, guys.